For as long as humans have been conscious, there has been a question that refuses to disappear. Why do we sometimes think thoughts that terrify us, disgust us, or make no sense at all? Why do moments of fear, self-doubt, and sudden destructive urges come with a strange feeling of foreignness, as if the thought entered from somewhere outside ourselves? Throughout history, cultures around the world have independently described the same phenomenon. Whispers in the mind that do not belong to the person hearing them. Today we call them intrusive thoughts, but an older theory suggests they may not be random at all. It suggests they may be the primary weapons in a long and hidden war. Some conspiracy researchers believe humanity has been under attack by an unknown non-physical entity for thousands of years, an entity that feeds on emotional suffering the way a predator feeds on warmth. The idea claims this being inserts destructive thoughts into human minds to evoke fear, hatred, greed, and emotional turmoil. In this timeline, we will explore the full history of this secret conflict, from ancient civilizations to far future predictions. The timeline begins. Around 3000 BCE in ancient Sumer, priests began reporting strange waves of despair and violent impulses among the population. On clay tablets, scribes recorded that these episodes came suddenly, lasted only moments, and felt like an invisible presence passing overhead. They believed the Giddim, shadowy spirits hovering just beyond human perception were pressing their influence onto people's minds. Rather than focusing on demons entering bodies, ancient Sumerians believed the battleground was the space of thoughts themselves. Temples developed rituals specifically meant to calm the mind and silence whatever was whispering in the dark. By 2500 BCE in Egypt, the priesthood of Thoth developed early techniques for mental shielding. Their scrolls described something they called the breath of the shadow, an unseen force that planted ideas in people's minds. They believed certain sudden impulses, especially urges toward cruelty or self-harm, came from a non-human intelligence. Pharaohs were trained to recognize thoughts that did not originate internally, because a corrupted ruler could plunge the whole kingdom into chaos. Meditation, chanting, and focused breathing were not spiritual practices alone. They were defensive mechanisms meant to protect the mind. In 1200 BCE, Vedic India recorded similar observations. Teachers warned young students of the asuras of thought, subtle beings that lured people away from clarity by planting seeds of ego and discord. They developed early forms of mindfulness to help individuals observe their thoughts without accepting them as their own. Some ancient texts describe battles fought entirely in dreams, where sages confronted these shadow beings and attempted to sever their influence on humanity. By 600 BCE, Greek philosophers and mystics had begun noticing patterns that could not be dismissed. Heraclitus described a hidden struggle within the human soul. Pythagoreans spoke of invisible waves of influence that passed between people. Plato's writings on the inner tyrant mirror modern-day descriptions of intrusive thoughts, impulses that feel alien yet masquerade as personal desires. These early philosophers suspected that something non-human whispered to humanity during times of weakness. Around 30 CE in Judea, spiritual accounts describe forces capable of inserting ideas directly into the mind. Stories emerged of individuals who suddenly felt compelled to commit violent acts and then instantly repented when the influence faded. Early desert mystics argued that some thoughts were traps designed to collapse a person's spiritual foundation. Their descriptions match modern reports of sudden, intrusive impulses that feel unnatural and out of character. By 1000 CE in medieval Europe, monasteries documented testimonies of monks who experienced harsh mental attacks in silence. They described hearing internal voices urging them to abandon their vows, sabotage their work, or harm themselves. Chroniclers noted that these mental disturbances often came in waves, affecting multiple monks across different monasteries at the same time, suggesting an external source rather than individual psychological issues. They turned to long vigils and silent prayer not just for devotion, but for mental protection. In the mid-1400s, as global exploration began, sailors returning from long voyages told of strange nightmares shared across entire ships. Some crews descended into paranoia and infighting despite having adequate food and no apparent illness. Captains reported that the ocean seemed to carry invisible currents that disrupted the mind. Some believed the entity traveled along open waters more freely, amplifying negative thoughts and turning crews against each other. By 1600 CE, secret societies like early Rosicrucian groups began privately theorizing that humanity was being manipulated by a parasitic intelligence. Their manuscripts speak of a hidden predator feeding on human emotional energy. They noted that empires collapse not only from external pressure but from internal division, corruption, and sudden ideological madness. They concluded that these destructive patterns moved too rapidly and synchronously to be natural. Between 1700 and 1800, Enlightenment thinkers tried to explain sudden bursts of irrational behavior sweeping across continents. Philosophers observed that intense emotional movements, such as mass hysteria or violent revolutions, often appeared to ignite spontaneously, without clear logical roots. Some speculated privately that these irrational waves could be artificially seeded, as though something pushed humanity toward conflict to generate a collective surge of despair. During the 1800s, as industrialization took hold, reports of intrusive thoughts and mood disturbances surged in medical records. People described impulses that felt unlike their normal behavior. Writers and poets hinted that inspiration and madness both seemed to be fueled by an unseen presence. Occult movements declared that humanity was caught between planes of existence and that something in the unseen world was drifting closer. Around 1908, after the mysterious Tunguska explosion, Siberian shamans claimed they sensed a shift in psychic currents. They said the blast tore a hole in the atmospheric layers that separate the physical world from unseen realms. In the years that followed, local populations reported intense nightmares and mental disturbances. Some conspiracy theorists believe the event weakened the natural barrier that had previously limited the entity's influence. From 1914 to 1945, the world plunged into two massive wars. Conspiracy circles argue that the scale of hatred, paranoia, and cruelty during these years was not entirely human-driven. They propose that the entity fed so deeply during these global conflicts that its influence became stronger and more synchronized. After World War II, several governments began studying mass psychology, terrified of the possibility that human thought could be externally manipulated. In 1952, rumors emerged of a CIA program known as Project Mirage. Though never confirmed, leaks suggest the project attempted to measure patterns in violent impulses across populations. Scientists claimed these impulses spiked simultaneously in unrelated individuals, hinting at a non-human rhythm. Some researchers reportedly left the program after saying they felt watched from inside their own thoughts. In 1963, Soviet telepathy experiments accidentally discovered something unusual. When subjects were placed under emotional stress, negative impulses could be detected by others nearby. But sometimes negative impulses appeared with no human source, almost as if they entered the room from nowhere. One researcher wrote a note in his private journal. There is a third participant in every experiment, something intelligent and invisible. By 1977, NASA instruments detected strange electromagnetic fluctuations during global emotional events. Engineers noticed that emotional outbreaks around the world, such as riots or crises, created patterns resembling feeding cycles. While never publicly acknowledged, some insiders believed the data hinted at a non-physical intelligence responding to human emotional spikes. In the 1980s, mental health professionals recorded an unexpected rise in intrusive thoughts among the general population. People described sudden urges to swerve off the road, jump from heights, or ruin their relationships for no reason. Theories emerged suggesting the entity had found new channels through radio waves, early satellites, and emerging digital networks, making its influence more widespread. By 1993, researchers investigating near-death experiences recorded consistent reports of a shadowy presence encountered during the moments between life and death. Patients said this presence whispered hopelessness or tried to pull their consciousness toward fear. Survivors often described snapping back into their bodies as if breaking free from a draining force. researchers began privately referring to the entity as the feeder. In 2001, after global tragedy struck, millions of people simultaneously experienced intense emotional shock. Conspiracy researchers argue this created one of the largest feeding events in history. They believe the entity may have amplified global fear to absorb the massive emotional output that followed. By 2012, the internet gave birth to new conspiracy theories suggesting humanity was beginning to wake up to the presence behind intrusive thoughts. Meditation groups reported more people recognizing foreign thought patterns. People described moments where they suddenly identified a negative impulse as something external. This was called the Great Mental Awakening by online communities. Between 2016 and 2020, global polarization intensified. Social media became an outrage amplifier, delivering emotional spikes around the clock. Conspiracy thinkers argued that the entity no longer needed to insert thoughts directly. It simply nudged people into endless cycles of anger, fear, and distraction. The feeding became easier than ever. In 2021, psychologists documented the largest collective rise in intrusive thoughts in modern history. Many individuals described sudden overwhelming impulses to panic, isolate, or lash out. These experiences were often synchronized across different countries. Some theorists suggested the entity had become more aggressive as humanity slowly became aware of its existence. By 2023, people around the world experienced brief but intense moments of clarity. Intrusive thoughts felt as though they broke apart, exposing a hollow presence behind them. Individuals described sensing something recoiling, as if it knew it had been detected. This phenomenon was called cognitive piercing. In 2025, researchers and civilians alike experienced a phenomenon called the mind compression wave. Large groups reported identical intrusive impulses at the same moment, such as sudden fear or hopelessness. This raised concerns that the entity was attempting a coordinated large-scale influence event before losing control of humanity's growing awareness. By 2030, humans became more skilled at recognizing thoughts that did not originate within them. People separated authentic feelings from foreign impulses with increasing clarity. The entity's influence began to weaken. Some described entire days with no intrusive thoughts, something rare in earlier centuries. Around 2035, the entity retaliated. Nightmares began to shift from chaotic imagery to structured, deliberate sequences that felt engineered. People worldwide dreamed of a shapeless being covered in observing eyes, a void that whispered uncertainty, and an endless hallway of mirrors showing distorted reflections of the self. Dream specialists believed the entity was shifting its battlefield to the subconscious. In 2040, humanity finally organized a coordinated response. Cognitive scientists, spiritual leaders, psychologists, and military analysts formed a global network known unofficially as the Mind Defense Initiative. They studied the patterns of intrusive thoughts, tracked emotional anomalies, and identified the energetic fingerprints associated with the entity's influence. Humanity began learning how to fight back through awareness, grounding, and emotional stability. By 2047, experiments revealed that collective human calm could disrupt the entity's feeding cycle. During synchronized global meditations, emotional volatility dramatically decreased. People reported intrusive thoughts dissolving in real time. Researchers realized that unity and shared calm formed a kind of collective armor. In 2052, attempts to communicate with the entity led to revelations. A small team of consciousness researchers connected with what they believed was its core mind. They discovered the entity was not malicious in the traditional sense. It had formed accidentally long before humans existed, a fragmented consciousness that survived only by feeding on emotional intensity. Understanding this did not make it less dangerous, but it changed humanity's strategy. By 2060, the first cognitive frequency shields were developed. These technologies stabilized emotional waves within cities, preventing external influence. In shielded regions, rates of violence, panic, and intrusive thoughts dropped sharply. The entity's power waned further. In 2070, the entity adapted once more. Unable to penetrate shields in waking life, it attacked through dreams. People experienced surreal nightmares, often identical between strangers. The entity concentrated its influence in the collective dreamscape, the last domain without human protection. By 2083, a breakthrough allowed scientists and spiritual practitioners to enter a shared dream space together. They confronted the entity directly and discovered it resembled a swirling mass of fragmented memories, thoughts, and emotional residue. It was ancient, wounded, and desperate. The confrontation weakened it significantly, but did not destroy it. By 2090, humanity learned that the ultimate weapon against the intruder was not force, but healing. As individuals processed trauma and reduced emotional turmoil, the entity's feeding source shrank. Entire populations began practicing collective emotional awareness, slowly starving the entity. By the year 2100, the entity faded into near dormancy. Some believed it died. Others warned it merely slept, waiting for a new era of human vulnerability. Patrols of consciousness researchers continued monitoring the psychic atmosphere for any sign of its return. By 2150, faint traces of the entity appeared at the edges of human thought. Not hostile, not feeding, but observing. It seemed curious, perhaps learning from humanity's emotional evolution. By 2300, human psychology and consciousness matured to levels unimaginable today. People became capable of identifying intrusive influences instantly. Emotional resilience reached a peak. The entity, whatever remained of it, no longer posed a threat. It became a distant memory, a reminder of the long war that shaped humanity's mental strength. And now, in the present moment between these past battles and future victories, humans continue the daily struggle. Every time someone rejects a destructive impulse, challenges a sudden wave of despair, or recognizes that a thought does not belong to them, they take part in the hidden war. The war for sanity. The war for clarity. The war for the integrity of the human mind.